something strange happened backstage in Paris. When Meghan Markle walked in, the entire room froze. Insiders say it wasn't diva behavior, it was something else, an aura so unsettling that photographers hesitated to even get close. What did they sense that the cameras couldn't see? Let's get into it. What if I told you that the Duchess of Sussex's grand return to the global stage wasn't a comeback, but a complete and total demolition of her own carefully constructed image? It began in Paris, not with a whisper, but with the clack of towering heels on pavement, a sound that announced a desperate gambit for relevance. Every camera flash told a story of supposed triumph, with Meghan, clad in a stark white ensemble, some called the Messiah gown, and others derisively dubbed the toilet paper dress, striding with the manufactured confidence of a Hollywood actress playing a queen. This wasn't just a walk, it was a performance piece, a declaration of war on her perceived irrelevance. The problem? Paris is the one city in the world that can spot a fraud from a mile away. The city's very soul, steeped in the philosophy of times sprezzatura, times a certain nonchalance, so as to conceal all art and make whatever one does or says appear to be without effort, and almost without any thought about it, acted as an immediate and unforgiving judge. Her strut was pure Zoolander, a mechanical, unblinking march where nothing moved but her legs. She'd pivot, look back over her shoulder, ensuring the cameras captured every angle of the practiced pose. We've seen this before. Digital sleuths immediately placed clips of this arrival side by side with another entrance in a black Diana-esque dress. The same arm placement, the same turn of the head, the same hollow smile. It was a pre-programmed routine, a sequence she had rehearsed in front of a Montecito mirror until it was stripped of all spontaneity. She wasn't inhabiting the moment. She was executing a script. And in a city that prizes effortless chic, what the French call times je ne sais quoi times her visible effort, was a screaming indictment of her inauthenticity. She wasn't a gazelle, like the supermodels of the 90 seconds she so desperately emulates. She was, as the kids would say, a sweaty tryhard, and the second-hand embarrassment was palpable even through a screen. This was not the entrance of a duchess, a woman secure in her status and grace. It was the frantic maneuvering of someone who knows her brand is hemorrhaging relevance by the day. She was acting out a fantasy, a carefully constructed narrative of a triumphant royal rebel returning to conquer the world of high fashion. But the reality was far more pathetic. She was a calculating social climber who had misjudged her audience so profoundly that it bordered on delusional. The unbeatable institution she was up against this time wasn't the British monarchy, it was the even more ancient and ruthless institution of Parisian high society, and they were not impressed. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, but the real story, the one that would slice through years of PR spin like a hot knife through butter, was about to unfold not in front of the flashing lights, but in the chilling, eloquent silence behind them. Have you ever seen an entire room full of people freeze in unison? That's exactly what happened the second Meghan Markle swept into the backstage area of the Balenciaga show. The usual frenetic, champagne-fueled energy of stylists, makeup artists, and assistants evaporated on contact. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One insider, a veteran of dozens of fashion weeks who has seen it all, described it not as diva behavior, but as something far more unsettling. It was like walking into a storm, they whispered to a colleague, their eyes wide. The air just went cold. Everyone froze. It was a social phenomenon known as a collective freeze, a primal response to a perceived threat. In this case, the threat wasn't physical. It was a threat to the carefully curated atmosphere of effortless cool. Seasoned photographers, men and women who would normally wrestle each other to the ground for a candid shot of an A-lister, hesitated. They lowered their cameras, unsure how close to get. The space around her became a vacuum, an invisible wall of social distance that even the creative director, Pier Paolo Piccioli, seemed unable to penetrate. His polite but visibly strained expression during their awkward encounter was a masterclass in professional discomfort. The contrast was devastating. While other celebrities like Zendaya or Kim Kardashian are swarmed, embraced, and absorbed into the creative energy of the house, Meghan remained a solitary island in a sea of activity. High-profile editors, the powerful gatekeepers of the fashion world, suddenly became engrossed in their phones or deep in conversation on the other side of the room. This wasn't an oversight, it was a verdict, delivered with the silent, brutal efficiency that only the truly powerful possess. In Paris, authenticity is the ultimate currency, and the room was conducting a silent audit of Meghan's presence. Every forced smile, every rigid, over-rehearsed gesture was being measured against the effortless grace of true icons. The judgment was swift and unanimous. She didn't belong. The whispers weren't about the cut of her dress. They were about her aura, tense, forced, and utterly cripplingly out of place. This silent trial, conducted in the hushed corridors of power far from the public eye, was more damning than any tabloid headline could ever be. It was a quiet but deadly rejection from the very industry she was so desperate to conquer. Something absolutely massive just erupted backstage, and this time, it had nothing to do with awkward encounters or borrowed dresses. It was a moral bombshell that threatened to obliterate Meghan's entire humanitarian brand. The house she chose for her grand comeback, Balenciaga, was still radioactive from one of the most disgusting scandals in recent fashion history. Ad campaigns featuring children posed with teddy bears, dressed in BDSM-style gear, and surrounded by disturbing documents related to the Supreme Court case Times, United States v. Williams *, a landmark ruling on child pornography laws. And there was Meghan, smiling and posing, the self-proclaimed protector of children and champion of internet safety, lending her royal-adjacent credibility to a brand accused of predatory behavior. The irony wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. This is a woman who, with a straight face, accepted a Humanitarian of the Year award for her work protecting children online. How can you accept that award one week and become a walking billboard for a company embroiled in an exploitation scandal the next? It's a pattern of cognitive dissonance so profound it borders on pathology. It demonstrates what psychologists call moral licensing, where individuals, after doing something good, feel they have a license to engage in questionable behavior. The whispers backstage immediately shifted from her tense aura to her staggering lack of judgment. She has a whole organization, Archewell, dedicated to creating a better online world, one stylist muttered in disbelief to a colleague. Does she think we're all idiots? That nobody has a memory? This wasn't just a poor choice of outfit. It was a catastrophic brand alignment, an unforced error that sliced through years of carefully crafted PR spin with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The woman who claims to fight for the vulnerable was actively promoting a brand that stood accused of the very thing she preaches against. It was a crisis of conscience that revealed a devastating truth, a truth that has been hiding in plain sight for years. For the Duchess of Montecito, principles are always for sale, and the price is a front-row seat and a fleeting photo opportunity. Before the last flashbulb had even cooled, the internet had already convened its own grand jury, and the verdict was brutal. Social media didn't just disapprove, it conducted a full-scale digital autopsy on Meghan's breathtaking hypocrisy. This is the Streisand effect in hyperdrive, where an attempt to control a narrative only serves to amplify the very information one wishes to suppress. TikTok and Instagram, platforms she so desperately wants to conquer, exploded with blistering critiques and savage memes. One viral video juxtaposed her self-righteous pronouncements about protecting children from the Oprah interview with high-resolution images of the disturbing Balenciaga ads. All set to a soundtrack of dissonant circus music, it was a demolition. The hashtag #ParisExposed began trending globally, a real-time forensic case file chronicling her isolation and catastrophic judgment. Commentators and digital sleuths worked with the cold precision of prosecutors, laying out the receipts for the world to see. She's always willing to throw away her principles for money and freebies. One viral tweet read, garnering tens of thousands of likes in a matter of hours. Another user created a devastating side-by-side comparison that went nuclear. On one side, a photo of Meghan standing alone and awkward in her borrowed dress. On the other, an image of Rihanna, pregnant and radiant, being literally worshipped by the creative team at Dior. The caption was merciless. One of these women has influence. The other has an invitation. Ouch. The online eruption was definitive proof that the carefully controlled narrative she and Harry have tried to build is nothing more than a house of cards. They can sue tabloids into submission and control every frame of their Netflix documentaries, but they cannot control the decentralized, relentless court of public opinion, especially when the evidence of their own contradictions is so damning. All the PR teams in Montecito, with all their crisis management strategies, couldn't put this genie back in the bottle. Paris had exposed the truth, and the internet, the great and terrible archive of our time, was ensuring it would never be forgotten. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Moving from the realm of bad judgment into something almost primal. Beyond the moral hypocrisy and the icy reception, a new and far more personal rumor began to circulate through the backstage corridors, one that spread like wildfire. Whispers claimed Meghan's presence wasn't just tense. It came with an unmistakable aura, or as some sources crudely described it, a smell. Several insiders, speaking on condition of anonymity, described it as the scent of stress layered with a cheap, cloying perfume. It was the olfactory equivalent of her forced smile. Another journalist joked to a colleague, "You can fix the makeup, but you can't fix that." Whether truth or malicious exaggeration, the story took hold instantly because it confirmed what everyone was already feeling, a palpable sense of discomfort in her presence. In the world of high fashion, perception is reality. Arrogance can be celebrated, scandal can be forgiven. But when your very presence alienates those around you, the city's elite take quiet, decisive note. The human brain is hardwired to process scent as a powerful indicator of safety or danger, a concept known as chemosignaling. The story, true or not, became a potent metaphor for her entire Parisian disaster. She was trying to project an image of glamour and power, but what people were actually sensing was desperation and anxiety. Her body was betraying her carefully constructed mask. She wasn't untouchable because she was an A-lister. She was untouchable because people literally did not want to be near the chaotic energy she was emitting. The rumor, of course, made its way online with shocking speed. "She's untouchable," literally, one viral post mocked. For someone who has built an entire brand on charm, poise, and influence, this kind of backstage gossip is deadly. It suggested that beneath the layers of couture and practiced smiles was a woman completely unraveling under pressure, and the stench of that panic was, for those in the room, impossible to ignore. As if the backstage implosion wasn't enough, the real storm hit after Meghan left the Balenciaga show. And this wasn't just a scandal, it was a sacrilege. Word spread through Paris like a shockwave. Her car had been driven through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the very same tunnel where Diana, Princess of Wales, tragically lost her life in a horrific crash while being pursued by paparazzi on August 31st, 1997. At first, some tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, a logistical choice by an ignorant driver. But insiders, journalists, and anyone with even a passing knowledge of the Sussexes' systematic narrative manipulation knew better. This was no accident. This was a pilgrimage. For years, Meghan has engaged in a calculated campaign to co-opt Diana's legacy, a psychological phenomenon known as identity appropriation. From studying Andrew Morton's biography Diana, Her True Story like a PhD dissertation, to mimicking her gestures and, most importantly, positioning herself as Diana's modern-day successor in victimhood. For her to make a pilgrimage to the site of Diana's death felt, to many, like a desecration. It was a violation of sacred ground. Critics immediately called it sick, twisted, and deeply manipulative, an unsettling attempt to physically insert herself into the most tragic chapter of Diana's story. Parisians, who are fiercely protective of Diana's memory and still leave flowers at the nearby Flame of Liberty monument, were outraged. How could a woman who, along with her husband, constantly weaponizes Diana's death as a warning of her own potential fate, turn that hallowed ground into a backdrop for her own PR tour? It was a ghoulish and narcissistic act, a move so calculated and tasteless that it revealed the chilling depths of her obsession. She wasn't honoring Diana, she was using the ghost of her mother-in-law as a prop in her own psychodrama. This was not a tribute, it was a trespass. And for a city that remembers that night with profound sadness, it was utterly unforgivable. The Pont de l'Alma incident wasn't an isolated event. It was the smoking gun in a coherent pattern of breathtaking hypocrisy. Let's conduct a forensic examination of the evidence, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. On one hand, you have Meghan and Harry, who have built a global brand on condemning the media's exploitation of Diana. They cite the paparazzi chase that led to her death as the primary justification for their demands for privacy and their unending war against the press. Prince Harry, in his book Time's Spare Asterisk, and in multiple interviews, has explicitly blamed the press for his mother's death. He's made it the central trauma of his existence. Yet, what do? In 2021, they grant their most explosive, family-destroying interview to Oprah Winfrey on CBS, the very same network that profited handsomely from broadcasting the most invasive and tragic details of Diana's life and death in 1997. It was a ratings bonanza then, and it was a ratings bonanza for them. They condemn the tabloids but then use the most tabloid-esque tactics, unsubstantiated claims of racism, calculated emotional appeals to attack their own family on a global stage. This is a classic case of what psychologists call projective identification, where one person projects an unwanted part of themselves onto another. They accuse the press of the very sins they themselves are committing. And now, in Paris, Meghan reenacts a piece of Diana's final journey, creating a media moment ripe for the very speculation and intrusive coverage she claims to despise. It's a chain of inconsistencies so high, a house of cards built on such a flimsy foundation, that it collapses under the slightest scrutiny. How can you condemn the exploitation of tragedy while simultaneously collaborating with the corporate giants who pioneered it, and then staging a moment that practically begs for the same treatment? The answer is simple, and it's devastating. For the Sussexes, Diana is not a cherished memory of a mother. She is a strategic asset. Her tragedy is not a warning, it is a blueprint. And this Paris pilgrimage was just the latest, most shameless maneuver in their long and sordid con. By the third day of Paris Fashion Week, the narrative had shifted from quiet judgment to overt exclusion. An invisible wall had been erected around Meghan Markle, and it was as solid as the stones of the Louvre. Designers, editors, and fellow celebrities who would normally trip over themselves to be photographed with a duchess were now keeping a conspicuous distance. This wasn't just happenstance. It was a coordinated social maneuver, a phenomenon sociologists call shunning, paparazzi shots, which Meghan's team no doubt hoped would show her mingling with the elite, instead captured a starkly different reality. Meghan, poised but utterly isolated, standing alone in a hotel lobby or sitting in a car with a fixed, rictus smile. The social media comparisons were brutal and instantaneous. There was Zendaya, wrapped in an authentic, joyous hug, by the creative director of Valentino. There was Kim Kardashian, surrounded by a laughing, energetic team of stylists. And then there was Meghan, in her borrowed Balenciaga, with a noticeable empty space around her. A bubble of social death. Insiders confirmed this was a deliberate distancing, a calculated move. PR managers for major celebrities were allegedly overheard cautioning their clients in hushed tones. Being seen near her is a risk right now. Think about that for a second. In an industry built entirely on influence, alliances, and cultural capital, that is a quiet but fatal diagnosis. It's the social equivalent of a credit downgrade to junk status. Paris doesn't reward desperation, and it certainly doesn't forgive a fraud. Despite her attempts to radiate confidence, the city's elite, the true arbiters of who's in and who's out, had made its decision. She was out. The borrowed clothes, the empty chairs next to her, and the whispered warnings all spoke a language she couldn't fake or spin. She was an outsider, a pariah. And Paris, with its characteristic cool indifference, had made it unmistakably, painfully clear that she was not welcome. The palace doors didn't just close on her. Now the doors of global high society were being slammed shut. Let's deconstruct exactly why the Parisian fashion elite rejected her so completely. It goes beyond the scandals. It's about the fundamental difference between being an icon and trying to play one. The kids call it a sweaty tryhard, someone whose effort is so painfully obvious that it makes everyone around them uncomfortable. True style icons like Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, or even a modern royal like Catherine, Princess of Wales, possess an effortlessness. You never see them trying. You are simply captivated by their grace. This concept *sprezzatura*, the art of concealing art, is the bedrock of aristocratic and high-fashion presentation. Meghan, in contrast, is all effort. You can see the gears turning behind her eyes. You can see the rehearsed poses, The practiced smile held just a second too long, the headlights on posture with shoulders pulled back and chest thrust out. She strides not with the fluid grace of a gazelle, but with a rigid, almost militaristic determination that screams, "Look at me. Acknowledge my importance." This desperation was further exposed by a crucial detail: the clothes themselves. While real A-listers are draped in custom couture, a gesture of mutual respect and creative partnership between artist and muse, Meghan was in a borrowed, off-the-rack Balenciaga dress. It immediately signaled her status to everyone in the room. She wasn't important enough for a custom creation. She was a temporary billboard, not an inspiration. The contrast paints a devastating picture of an amateur trying to play in the major leagues. She studied the script, she learned the lines, but she fundamentally misunderstands the art of it. She lacks the one thing that cannot be faked, bought, or rehearsed: authenticity. Paris, the ultimate arbiter of style and substance, saw through the performance instantly. They weren't looking at a duchess or a fashion plate. They were looking at a woman trying so desperately hard to be something she's not. And the second-hand embarrassment, the sheer cringe of it all, was simply too much to bear. The final verdict on Meghan Markle wasn't delivered in a screaming tabloid headline. It was whispered in the front rows and confirmed in the private suites of Paris's top fashion houses. This wasn't just a cold shoulder. It was a quiet, professional blacklisting. The industry didn't just shun her publicly. They excommunicated her privately. Seasoned stylists admitted, off the record, that PR managers for major celebrities were issuing quiet but firm directives. Avoid being photographed with her, do not engage, maintain a clear and unmistakable distance. The risk of brand association, of getting caught in her toxic slipstream, was deemed far too high. Why? Because Meghan had become radioactive. She brought with her a perfect storm of negative press. A moral scandal with Balenciaga that reeked of hypocrisy, a ghoulish appropriation of Diana's tragedy, and an overwhelming aura of desperate inauthenticity. In the high-stakes world of luxury branding, a world that trades on aspiration and an impeccable, almost sacred image, she was suddenly a contagion. A French fashion editor, a woman whose opinion can make or break a career, was allegedly overheard telling a colleague over an espresso, "She is not a muse, she is a liability." That right there is the ultimate rejection in a world where your entire value is measured by your influence and your cultural capital. Hers had just plummeted to zero. The unbeatable institution of high fashion, much like the monarchy she so dramatically fled, operates on its own ancient, unspoken rules. It doesn't care about your Netflix deal or your manufactured humanitarian awards. It cares about authenticity, relevance, and prestige. In Paris, the Duchess of Montecito was weighed, she was measured, and she was found wanting on all three counts. The quiet, calculated exclusion wasn't just an insult, it was the industry's final, damning word. The doors had not just been closed, they had been locked, bolted, and sealed for good. The Paris disaster wasn't just a bad week for Meghan. It was a catastrophic turning point for the entire Sussex brand. For years they have built their Montecito empire on a carefully constructed narrative triptych: victimhood, global influence, and moral superiority. In the span of a few days, Paris took a scalpel to that narrative and sliced it to ribbons. Their brand is built on quicksand, and this trip exposed the flimsy foundations for the entire world to see. The global influence was revealed to be a complete mirage when the truly influential kept their distance, treating her like a social contagion. The moral superiority evaporated into thin air the moment she became a walking advertisement for Balenciaga, a brand tainted by one of the ugliest scandals imaginable. And the victimhood narrative became a sick, twisted joke when she turned Diana's place of death into a ghoulish photo opportunity. What Paris proved is that the Sussex brand is hemorrhaging relevance by the day. They are no longer seen as rebels or truth-tellers, but as performers whose act has grown stale and predictable. In what can only be described as a monumental strategic blunder, they traded the authentic, inherited soft power of the British monarchy for the fickle, fleeting, and utterly ruthless currency of celebrity, and they are quickly discovering they are not skilled enough to compete in that arena. This was more than a fashion faux pas. It was a systemic brand failure. It revealed to the world, and more importantly, to the powerful corporations and brands they need to court for their survival, that their judgment is fatally flawed, their credibility is shot, and their cultural capital is in absolute freefall. The fairy tale is over. The question is no longer times if times the entire Montecito house of cards will collapse, but times when asterisk, make no mistake, the consequences of the Paris implosion will not be limited to fashion magazines and gossip columns. The real fallout, the one that truly matters in their world, will be felt in the cold, unforgiving boardrooms of Hollywood and on the balance sheets of Arkwell Productions. Hollywood, much like the fashion world, is a ruthless ecosystem that runs on one thing and one thing only: perception. Bankability is everything. After such a high-profile public cold shouldering, insiders report that studios and streaming platforms that once lined up for a piece of the Sussex magic are now getting cold feet. The phone calls aren't being returned as quickly. The meetings are being postponed. Why? Because the perception of their value has cratered. If Paris, the ultimate arbiter of glamour and influence, has turned its back, what does that say about their broader global appeal? The equation is brutally simple. If you can't command respect in a room full of designers, how can you be expected to carry a blockbuster film or a global media franchise? Brand meetings that had been scheduled with breathless excitement are now reportedly being quietly stalled or indefinitely postponed. No one in Hollywood wants to risk millions of dollars on a personality who has proven to be so tone-deaf and whose public image is now irrevocably volatile. The whispers from Paris have become a massive red flag for investors and executives. Her brand is no longer seen as aspirational. It's seen as a high-risk, low-return liability. For a woman who is, at her core, only about the money and the status it buys, this is the most terrifying consequence of all. The silence from the fashion world was deafening, but the silence from the Hollywood studios who hold the purse strings will be nothing short of devastatingly expensive. Perhaps the most telling sign of the Paris disaster's magnitude was the reaction, or rather, the lack of one, from within Meghan's own echo chamber. For years, her loyal fan base, the so-called Sussex Squad, has been a formidable online army, a digital Praetorian Guard ready to defend her every move and launch coordinated attacks on any critic. But after Paris, something shifted. A chilling silence began to descend. Instagram posts that were once flooded with thousands of heart emojis and fawning praise now featured a noticeable uptick in sarcastic comments and critical questions. Memes about the borrowed couture and empty chairs began to circulate not just among critics, but among former fans who felt embarrassed by her performance. The cognitive dissonance of defending a humanitarian who promotes Balenciaga became too much for many to stomach. The ghoulishness of the Diana Tunnel stunt was a bridge too far, even for the most devoted. This shift signals a critical loss of control. Meghan has always been a master of narrative control, carefully curating her own story through sympathetic journalists like Omid Scobie and polished, self-produced propaganda. But in Paris, the story escaped her grasp. The raw, unfiltered reality of her isolation was captured and disseminated by thousands of ordinary people in real time. She lost control of the optics, and in doing so, she began to lose the unwavering, cult-like loyalty of the very audience she cultivated. An echo chamber only functions when it is sealed from outside reality. Paris shattered that seal, and when your own echo chamber starts to crack, when the dog that was supposed to bark in your defense falls silent, it's a terrifying sign that your entire brand is in a death spiral, from which there is likely no recovery. In the end, Paris delivered a verdict that was as cold and final as it was unspoken. The city didn't reject Meghan Markle's style, it rejected her substance, or rather her profound lack of it. It held up a mirror to her entire manufactured identity, and the reflection was that of a hollow, desperate performer. She came to the City of Lights seeking validation, hoping to be anointed as a global icon on par with the very legends she emulates. Instead, she was exposed. In the court of high culture, she was found guilty on all counts. She was exposed as a hypocrite of the highest order, a manipulator of tragedy, and worst of all in the eyes of the fashion elite, a rank amateur. The chilly reception, the Balenciaga scandal, the Diana Tunnel controversy, and the quiet, coordinated exclusion were not separate incidents. They were chapters in a single, devastating story. The complete and public unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. The silence from the industry's power players was more punishing than any negative headline could ever be. It was a declaration, issued from the true seat of cultural power, that she is irrelevant. Paris gave her the attention she so desperately craves, but it was not the kind she wanted. It was the pitiless, scrutinizing gaze of a city that has seen empires rise and fall, a city that knows the difference between true grace and a cheap imitation. As the French philosopher Voltaire once wrote, "The secret of being a bore is to tell everything." Meghan told everyone everything she was trying to be, and in doing so, became an object of ridicule. The final verdict was clear, written in the empty chairs beside her and the averted eyes of those she sought to impress. You don't belong here. And that judgment, that quiet, definitive excommunication, will follow her long after the runway lights have dimmed. So, where does the Duchess of Montecito go from here? After being so thoroughly and publicly rejected by the arbiters of global culture, what moves are left to play? The Paris trip wasn't just a failure, it was a strategic dead end. It proved, definitively, that she cannot compete on the A-list celebrity stage based on merit or charm. Her only remaining currency is her royal title, the very institution she and her husband sought to burn down. She has built herself a gilded cage in Montecito, a palace of beige mediocrity. But the walls are closing in. The Hollywood deals are reportedly drying up, the fashion world has locked its doors, and her public credibility is in tatters. Has she, through her own hubris and staggering lack of self-awareness, engineered the complete destruction of everything she schemed to achieve? Or is there another, even more desperate pivot on the horizon? Her brand is built on a foundation of grievance and manufactured drama, but even that has a shelf life. The world is growing tired of the performance. What do you think? Does Meghan have any cards left to play, or was the Paris disaster the final, fatal blow to her ambitions? Is she a master strategist backed into a corner, or just a C-list actress who got lucky and is now completely out of her depth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because if this forensic examination proves anything, it's that this story is far from over. And trust me, the next chapter, the one about what's really going on behind those Montecito gates, promises to be even more explosive. If you thought this breakdown was shocking, you haven't seen anything yet. Click the video on your screen right now. Thank you for watching Spilled Royalty. If you found this investigation as eye-opening as I did, don't forget to subscribe to Spilled Royalty and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single explosive update. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next.